Today, in the final creator sneak peeks, I'm going to be explaining every character in Squad Busters and their abilities. Now, before I show you every character's ability, I actually need to explain exactly how it works, because it might be a bit confusing if you're new to this. So every character in the game now has a troop ability and a spell ability. And I'm going to use Greg as an example to explain how this works. But for example, Greg's troop ability is that he can chop down a tree in order to get loot. But Greg's spell ability is that you get a log spell that you can well throw to a player. Now, this does not mean if you pick Greg from a chest or you break a tree that you get a log spell. What this actually means is the log spell is selectable via the hero menu, as you guys can see right here. If you have a classic Greg, you can then select the log in your lineup. Now, for this video, troop abilities are going to be outlined by a square and spell abilities are going to be outlined by a circle. Now, hopefully that all made sense. So let's get started off with the Barbarian. Okay, so starting off with the Barbarian, he's a fighter unit with 170 damage and 1,700 health. His baby ability summons 3 classic elite barbarians that charge at enemies, and this is a spell. His classic ability is a troop ability where he becomes an elite barbarian after bashing baddies a lot. At super, his barbarian gets enraged after taking damage. At ultra, he summons an extra elite barbarian in his spell. And at ultimate, busting a foe enrages the barbarian. Next up, we have Greg, who is a supplier who deals 130 damage, has 1,600 health. At baby, he will chop trees for extra loot. At classic, he will unlock the log spell, which topples enemies far away by rolling the log. At super, trees drop an additional heart. At ultra, the log recharges 30% faster. And at ultimate, trees drop 50% more extra loot. Next up is Colt. He's a hotshot who deals 400 damage and 1,500 health. That damage is crazy, by the way. At baby, he deals high damage with his dual pistols. At classic, he unlocks the spell, which fires a piercing barrage of long-range bullets. At super, Colt gets 20% extra attack speed. At ultra, upgraded bullet storm deals 20% extra damage. And at ultimate, Colt's attack fires 2 extra bullets. El Primo is a fighter with 150 damage and 2,000 health. At baby form, he heals self by 20% after using any power. At classic, he unlocks the spell, which summons an El Primo to stun foes with a body slam. At super, he increases self heal to 30%. And at ultra, his elbow drop spell stuns for 35% longer and deals 25% extra damage. Shelly is a hot shot with 220 damage and 1,650 health. Her spell unlocks at baby and it's shooting a stunning super shell. At classic, she uses a band-aid at low health to heal self by 40%. At super, she shoots a second barrel with her shotgun. At ultra, super shell stuns enemies 35% longer with a wider blast. And at ultimate, busting a foe instantly recharges the band-aid. The chicken is a speedster with 140 damage and 1,600 health. At baby, he will give 1 turbo after opening a chest. At classic, he will summon 7 chicken clones that give the squad a 35% speed boost. At super, he increases turbo boost given to 2. At ultra, his spell increases chicken clones to 9 and speed boost to 45%. And at ultimate, he increases turbo boost given to 3. The trader is the supplier who deals 120 damage and has 1,500 health. At baby, he gives a mega potion after collecting 30 coins. Now, this mega potion isn't as broken as it used to be in Showdown, but it still is really, really good. At classic, he unlocks the spell, which throws a shrink potion that reduces enemy damage by 90%. At super, he discounts the mega potions to 25 coins. And at ultra, the shrink potion lasts 50% longer. The goblin is a supplier who deals 190 damage and has 1,600 health. At baby, he will give you 5 coins. At classic, he unlocks the spell, which gives a secret stash of 5 coins that grow over time. At super, he increases coins given to 8. At ultra, coin stash grows after opening a chest. And at ultimate, he increases coins given to 12. Bo is a hot shot who deals 200 damage and has 1,500 health. At baby, he deals 100% extra damage to monsters. At classic, he unlocks the spell, which deploys a stunning mine that deals 400% more damage to monsters. At super, extra damage to monsters increased to 135%. At ultra, his mind trap spell charges up to charges time. That I assume is a bug. And at ultimate, Bo gets 60% extra attack speed against monsters. Mavis is a supplier who deals 130 damage and has 1,600 health. At baby, she picks carrots for extra coins. At classic, she unlocks the bug spray spell, which sprays a stunning cloud of bug spray. At super, she gets bonus loot from a fully picked carrot patch. And at ultra, bug spray will last 50% longer and travel further. Heavy is a hot shot who deals 360 damage and has 1,850 health. At baby, he will give other hot hotshot units 300 extra health upon joining. At classic, his spell sprays bullets in a direction that slows enemy movement speed by 50%. At super, he increases extra health given to 600. And at ultra, his spell sprays 35% more bullets during suppressing fire. Poco is a healer who deals 140 damage and has 1200 health. At baby, busting a foe heals the squad by 7%. At classic, he unlocks the stun enemies with wide-reaching musical blast spell. At super, he increases heal when busting a foe to 10%. And at ultra, his power chord spell deals 35% extra damage and travels further. And in case you don't know what a foe is, it's basically an enemy. The archer is a hotshot who deals 238 damage and has 1600 health. She's also a rare now. She used to be a common. At baby, she increases the squad attack range by 10%. At classic, she unlocks a shoot a precision rain of arrows spell. At super, the archer gets 20% extra attack speed. And at ultra, her spell increases damage 50% by shooting more volleys over a bigger area. Nita is a summoner who deals 150 damage, has 1650 health, and his baby ability summons Bruce the Bear into the squad. At classic, he unlocks the spell which summons Super Bruce to arrive with a stunning roar. At super, Bruce gets 40% extra health, and at ultra, the Super Bruce spell gets enraged upon joining. The medic is a healer who deals 125 damage and has 1550 health. At baby, he heals the squad slowly over time. At classic, he unlocks a spell which throws up to 5 potent heal packs to the squad. At super, heal gets 10% stronger and 20% more frequent. At ultra, his heal pack spell recharges 30% faster. And at ultimate, heal gets an additional 10% stronger and 20% more frequent. The bandit is a fighter who has 180 damage and 1650 health. At baby, he earns 2 extra coins from busting big monsters. At classic, he unlocks the spell which performs a stunning dash that steals 2 extra coins from up to 3 targets. At super, he increases extra coins earned to 3, and at ultra, his spell increases extra coins stolen to 3. Dynamite is a hotshot who deals 240 damage and has 1550 health. At baby, he deals area damage with powerful dynamites. At classic, he unlocks the barrel bomb spell which throws a huge barrel bomb with a devastating blast. At super, Dynamite gets a larger blast radius. At ultra, his barrel bomb spell recharges 20% faster. And at ultimate, upgraded Dynamite deals 30% extra damage. The Hog Rider is a speedster with 180 attack damage and 1700 health. Now, the Hog Rider received quite a big fall off, but his spell is actually really good, but you don't need to use the Hog Rider to use his spell. At baby, the squad gains a 55% speed boost when heroes move through the grass. That's not permanent turbo, by the way, just a speed boost. At classic, he unlocks a spell which summons 4 trampling hogs that knock around enemies. At super, his speed boost lasts 40% longer after leaving the grass. At ultra, his hog stampede summons 2 more hogs. And at ultimate, he increases speed boost in the grass to 70%. Penny is a supplier who deals 245 damage and has 1600 health. At baby, she finds a treasure map upon joining the squad. At classic, she unlocks a spell which shoots a heavy coin pouch that drops 6 coins. At super, the treasure contains additional hearts. And at ultra, her spell shoots a heavier pouch that drops 8 coins and deals 25% more damage. Frank is a fighter who deals 200 damage and has 1900 health. At baby, he speeds up squad stun recovery to 35%. This sounds like it could be broken. At classic, he unlocks the spell which smashes enemies with a powered up hammer slam. At super, he increases squad stun recovery to 50%. And at ultra, his super shockwave spell deals 20% extra damage and will travel further. The wizard is a hotshot who deals 135 damage and has 1550 health. At baby, powers from the hero recharge 15% faster. At classic, he will get a spell which lobs a massive fireball. At super, powers from squaddies recharge 15% faster. And at ultra, the mega fireball spell sets targets on fire for 50% additional damage. The tank is a summoner who deals 135 damage and has 1600 health. At baby, she summons and drives a powerful tank. At classic, she unlocks a spell which deploys a power tank with a boosted range and attack speed. At super, the tank gets 40% extra health. And at ultra, the power tank spell gets 15% extra attack speed and 20% speed boost. The ice wizard is a hotshot who deals 120 damage and has 1550 health. At baby, he throws a shattering Ice Fan after 6 attacks. At Classic, he unlocks the Freeze spell, which blankets an area with a bone-chilling blizzard. At Super, his Ice Fans require only 4 attacks to activate. And at Ultra, his Freeze spell will last 40% longer and will cover a bigger area. The Miner is a fighter with 180 damage and 2050 health. At Baby, he will find coins while burrowing with Turbo. At Classic, he will unlock the Miner spell, which scatters and stuns enemies by bursting from the ground. At Super, he will heal steadily while burrowing. And at Ultra, his Eruption spell will deal 20% extra damage over a bigger area. The Witch is a summoner who deals 250 attack damage and has 1,550 health. At Baby, she continuously summons skeletons into the squad. At Classic, she unlocks a Skeleton Barrel spell, which throws a heavy barrel filled with 6 elite skeletons. At Super, she summons elite skeletons with 50% extra health and 35% extra damage. At Ultra, she increases the elite skeletons in Skeleton Barrel spell to 9. And at Ultimate, nearby elite skeletons get 35% extra attack speed. Max is a speedster who deals 225 damage and has 1,600 health. At Baby, he gives the squad a 35% speed boost while charged. At Classic, she unlocks a spell which shoots a fast reloading burst of laser blasts. At Super, busting foes extends the speed boost. At Ultra, the burst shot spell recharges 40% faster while moving. And at Ultimate, the speed boost lasts 40% longer and recharges faster. Dr. T is a summoner who deals 125 damage and has 1,800 health. At Baby, he summons his Mega Crab after opening a chest, and this does follow you around your squad, by the way. At Classic, his spell summons an enraged Sentry Crab that defends a location. At Super, his Mega Crab gets 20% extra health and deals 20% more damage. And at Ultra, his Sentry Crab gets 30% extra health and 20% more extra damage. Jessie is a summoner who deals 235 attack damage and has 1,550 health, and by the way, she's an epic now, not a rare. At Baby, she deploys a turret after opening a chest. At Classic, she gets a spell which deploys a powered-up giant turret. At Super, Jessie's shots bounce to a nearby target. And at Ultra, her giant turret lasts 30% longer and has 30% extra health. B is a summoner who deals 220 attack damage and has 1,700 health. As you'll notice again, she is now a epic, not a rare. At Baby, she summons circling bees around the hero, and by the way, you do spawn with these bees already circling. At Classic, she has a spell which summons a frenzied swarm of 6 angry bees. At Super, she increases the number of circling bees to 3. At Ultra, the bee frenzy will last 40% longer, and at Ultimate, she will increase the number of circling bees to 6. Battle Healer is a healer who deals 240 damage and has 1,800 health. At Baby, she gives squaddies 1,250 extra health upon joining the squad. At Classic, she instantly damages nearby targets and heals the squad by 20%. This is a spell. And at Super, she increases extra health given to 1,500 health. And at Ultra, her Blazing Light spell will recharge 25% faster. Pam is a healer who deals 170 attack damage and has 1,700 health. She's also now an epic, not a rare as well. At Baby, she deploys a heal station after opening a chest. At Classic, she gets a spell which deploys a powered up giant heal station. At Super, her heal station emits a heal surge when destroyed. And at Ultra, her giant heal station spell gets a giant 35 range boost. Leon is a speedster who deals 280 attack damage and has 1,650 health. At Baby, he speed boosts the squad 30% after using any power. At Classic, he unlocks a spell where the squad stops attacking and becomes invisible to enemies briefly. At Super, he damage boosts the squad 20% after using any power. And at Ultra, his invisibility spell recharges 20% faster. Colonel Ruffs is a supplier who deals 250 attack damage and has 1,650 health. At Baby, he instantly upgrades a squaddie when joining the squad, so this is just a fusion, not a mega. At Classic, he unlocks a spell where he fires laser bolts that bounce through targets. At Super, instant upgrades get an additional level, so now you'll get a mega, not just a fusion. And at Ultra, his spell fires 2 additional scattershot laser bolts. Optimus Prime is a fighter who deals 170 attack damage and has 2,250 health. At Baby, he's the giant fighter that starts upgraded. At Classic, he attacks with his Energon axe after taking damage. And at Super, he heals the squad when taking damage, so no change. Same with Alita, she's a hotshot who deals 300 attack damage and has 1,950 health. At Baby, she's a giant hotshot that starts upgraded. At Classic, her turbocharges time-bending burst fire attacks. And at Super, burst attacks fire 2 more shots. So actually, she doesn't make your turbo last longer anymore. And for all the spells I was talking about in this video, you actually equip it through this menu right here. So boom, you can see I can equip whichever spell I want from the units, and you do not need to use that unit to equip the spell. So there you go. Anyways, that's all 35 troops recapped in this video. Make sure to check out my last video where I showed you gameplay on a lot of these troops and the 4 new heroes as well.